You want to talk about it? I'd rather laugh about it. Let's get a little dark about it.
On the Traumedy Show.
Welcome to the Traumedy Show. I'm your co-host, Rachel Wilford.
And I'm your other co-host, Megan Wilford.
And we are so excited to welcome our very special guest today, Anne Blythe. Anne is the producer and host of the Betrayal Trauma Recovery Podcast. She is also the founder and director of BTR.org, which is a community that aims to help women all over the world who have experienced all kinds of abuse. Anne is also a published author, creator of healing workshops, meditations, and more. Anne, welcome. We're so excited to have you.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much.
You have accomplished so much. It's really inspiring. It really is. I think that we're so just kind of on the same path in life of we're taking what happened to us and trying to turn it into something good that helps other people. And so we love what you're doing.
Yeah, ditto. You're doing amazing things too. Good job.
Thank you.
I think we found you. I was just doing research on other podcasts that have talked about trauma, relationship abuse, and because we wanted to collab, and we came across your website and your podcast and your Instagram, and we were like, wow, this person has so much helpful information out there. And we were so excited when we reached out and you agreed to be on our podcast. We also just interviewed for Anne's podcast. So we'll give a shout out there as well. But we have some questions for Anne to talk about all of her experience in this area.
Yeah, you guys had me at Traumedy. When you wrote, I was like, yes, these are my gals.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you've got it. When you talk about your story, you've got to tie in your comedy writing too. Yeah. We're excited to hear more about that. But yeah, Anne, would you mind diving into your story and telling Megan and I some more details about what happened there? And I think our listeners will really find it helpful too.
Yeah. So I was very upfront when I was dating that I did not want to marry an abusive man who used porn, who did drugs, and I had 8 things that I was really, really upfront about. And first date, sometimes I'd be like, "Hey, I don't want to marry or date a guy who uses porn. So if that's your thing, then I don't want to go out with you anymore." I was very
good for you for being upfront about it.
Yeah. And really, I'm really good at breaking up with people. So
I'm horrible at it. Maybe you can teach me.
So I broke up with a lot of people from when I was...
You get endorsed on LinkedIn. She's great at breakups.
I am. I'm so good at it. One of the things I think that made me really good at it was I didn't really care about conventional advice that people would give. People would be like, you can't break up with someone over text. And I was like, yeah, you can.
Watch me.
Why is that a problem? Or people would say, you can't do it that way. And I'd be like, absolutely you can. If you know someone's wrong for you, just get out. It doesn't matter how you do it,
Right.
Was my feeling about it. So I got accused quite a bit of being maybe uncaring or something. But I was like, what is more uncaring? Dating someone who isn't right for you, or just getting out any way you can if you can't figure out how to get out. There's no wrong way to get out of a relationship that's bad for you.
Yeah. And you're not wasting that person's time, and you're not wasting your time. It's respectful.
So even if you do it badly, it's better than not doing it at all, in my opinion. So this is my opinion, and these are sort of my feelings before I meet my husband, who I meet when we meet online. We're from the same faith. He's finishing law school. I've been a teacher for 8 years, and he is, of course, checking all my boxes because I am not shallow. I am goal-oriented, apparently. And I have these boxes that I want checked. And, I'm like, okay, he's going to have insurance, because at this point, I'm like, I want to marry someone who I described as sort of like an athletic nerd who's attractive physically, but also, a good dad.
Yeah.
Will be a good husband kind of a person. And so meet him. He's checking all these boxes, and we have this amazing romantic online sort of relationship and over the phone because he is in a different state because he's just finishing up and he's so busy, right? Because he's finishing law school, which made sense. And when we met in person, we got engaged within 2 weeks of meeting in person.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It was.
How long had your virtual relationship been going on after you met in person?
Only 3 months.
Okay. You just knew.
I did. I did not know that what I knew was that he was a narcissistic abuser and that he had been mirroring everything that I had said. So basically because I was so upfront, right? Because I was so this is what I want. I want this, and this. It was just like now if I don't date because I don't care to date anymore. but if I did, there's no way I would go in with a list and be like, okay, these are all the things I want. Because the narcissist will just be like, oh, okay, check. Oh yeah, me too. Oh, me too. Right. And they'll just mirror. So now I'm way more, I'm still myself with my friends and people that I know. But if I were to go on a date, and I have been on maybe 4 in the last 10 years or something. A few dates, but I just kind of sit back. And if they ask a question, I'm like, oh, well, you tell me, and I kind of try to pin them down before I say what I think.
Not show your cards too early. That's such good advice.
Yeah. Because they just mirror. And so of course this is my soulmate. Right? This is my man of my dreams because he
checks all your boxes.
Everything. Because everything I brought up, we were just totally in sync, right? Anyway, so I don't know, not a few months, because we got married within 6 months of meeting online. So we've only known each other in person for 2 or 3 months. And I'm 30 at the time, so I'm also this is the guy. I want to have babies very quickly because I want a few kids, so I need to get on this. Anyway, so before we get married, some really weird stuff goes down. And I'm like, this is weird. This is not me. You have a problem. You need to go to therapy. And he was like, yes, I'll go to therapy. Maybe we should put off our wedding until I've gone to therapy because I was abused as a kid. And, he gives me these reasons. And he'd told me about that before. And I was like, okay, well, I know that, it shows up in different ways. And he just seems so willing to get it worked out, that I was like, no, let's just get married now. And we've got the rest of our lives, to figure this out. When after our first child was born, and things are weird. They're weird. They're
how are they weird?
Not making sense. He just gets super mad about stuff that you shouldn't get super mad about.
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories was when he got really mad at me because I had made the neighbors cookies because they'd helped us move in, so I made them all cookies to thank him for helping us. And he was like, my mom used to make cookies for everyone else and he didn't make them for me. And I was like, well, I saved a bunch of the stuff and I put it in the freezer. I can make them for you right now. And he was like, that doesn't matter. And I was like,
whoa.
What? Well, and because of my personality, instead of being like, okay, I'm sorry. That makes sense that you were triggered.
Yeah.
I did not say that. I said, you're a psycho. They're in the freezer. You're acting like a 2-year-old. I don't know what your problem is, but no, you cannot act like this.
Yeah.
Yeah. These insane emotional outbursts.
Yeah. You're a freak.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Calling him out.
Yeah. So I would say that it's I think this is something that's really important for people to know and women to know, especially. At Betrayal Trauma Recovery, we only deal with women who have been abused by men. And so I always talk in a gender segregated way only because that is my audience, but not necessarily because women couldn't be abusers or liars. We know that women could be liars, but I just want to throw that out there that's just the audience that I speak to. But yeah, I think it's so many. I've over the years, because I've been podcasting forever. I've been, we provide services at Betrayal Trauma Recovery. So I interact with, when I say thousands, I'm not exaggerating. Like we've got a big social media presence and all the stuff that's going on at BTR. So, so many victims, they feel bad because they think, well, had I said something, right? I should have stood up for myself more, or I should have done this. And I hope this helps everyone feel better when that standing up for yourself doesn't solve an abuse problem. I did very loudly and assertively and even aggressively, I would say at times, and it doesn't solve the abuse because they just fight with you more. It's like fighting with a toddler, like I'm a mom of 3, but like a kid's throwing a big fit in the grocery store. You're not going to be like, hey, you're throwing a fit. You need to stop throwing a fit right now. And this kid doesn't say like, oh, thanks.
You're right, Mom. No.
Good point. I'm just going to crawl back up into the shopping cart. This is not what happens. And they're like this too. So you confront them, and then you're going to get like, well, you do this and you do this, or you might confront them and they'll groom you more like, oh, like, oh, I love you and I didn't mean it. And, so
right.
Confrontation does not solve an abuse problem. So that's where people are like, oh, what do we do? Right? Because if you can't confront them because they're just going to lie to you, and you can't not confront them because then they get what they want because they're trying to exploit you and they want you to comply with their abuse, which is why they're abusing you. So it's very lose-lose for victims of abuse. And that's why so many women are so confused and can't figure out how to get out. So I was the whole time he's acting weird. I'm like looking him straight in the eye. I'm like, you're looking at porn. And he was like, no, I'm not. And I'm like, oh, well, something's wrong with you. I don't know what your problem is, but something is wrong with you. And he kept trying to tell me it was me. And I was like, heck no, I'm awesome. I do not know what your problem is, but something is wrong with you. And after our first child is born, he comes and confesses that he has been using pornography compulsively, that he thinks he's a sex addict, and he starts going to pornography addiction recovery, which makes the abuse worse. I became this like pornography addiction recovery specialist. And this is like the most embarrassing part of my story. I was like, oh, my husband's the best pornography addict in recovery that there ever was. So we started doing public speaking, and I started like running a YouTube channel for this pornography addiction recovery practice. And like the largest anti-pornography conference in the world, we're like, there's the big giant keynote speaker, and then we're the second ones up there.
Wow.
Wow.
And we're like on podcasts and doing all this stuff. And I'm like, he's so great, like everyone should have a husband like my husband.
Yeah.
And he was very good at grooming. It took me a long time to figure out that he wasn't this really good guy who would kind of lose it every once in a while. He was an abuser, a psychological and emotional abuser who was wearing a mask, and that mask would fall off. And that's what the abuse episode, I would think like, oh, that's when he's lost it, not knowing that the whole thing was abuse, not knowing that the whole persona that he'd created was not who he really was.
Right.
So it all comes to a head when finally I'm like, I'm done. So I quit.
That's kind of interesting, like the way that you phrased it right now, because we call my ex on this podcast the wolf because he was such a wolf in sheep's clothing. Like he presented himself as this good guy, he didn't drink, he didn't do drugs, he was very soft-spoken, like, he works in a very like honorable industry, things like that. And so your ex kind of seems like a similar wolf in sheep's clothing kind of person, the way that you're describing him.
Yeah, he's very churchy, very like shows up at every single service project. If someone needs help moving, he's going to be there. He's an attorney. You know, he uses too big of words for his own good. I'm more of a meat and potatoes girl when it comes to words, so I'd always be like, no, you're not going to say Esquire. That's ridiculous. Like, you sound like a freak. Don't do that. Anyway, so of course, because my personality is the way it is, I'm going to get accused of abusing him, right? I'm emotionally abusive to him because I'm saying there's something wrong with you and you're a psycho, right? And am I saying that? Yes.
You're like, also, I'm just spitting facts here.
Also, there was something wrong with him and he was a psycho. So
the math is mathing.
Exactly. So it all kind of comes to a head when I realize that he is not the person who I have like set him out to be. And I realize he's not in recovery. He's actually not great at all. And I have been manipulated by him to like set him up on this pedestal. I mean, I got him on TV, stuff like that. So I just quit my job. I quit doing everything. I quit all of the speaking engagements. Like, he loved therapy. The therapists all thought he was just like so incredible and so smart. And he had all of these like super important things to say, and they all thought I was like, like he was such a saint sort of for putting up with me kind of a thing is sort of how everybody, like the misogynistic therapists and stuff treated me.
Yeah. Was this in couples therapy? Because I know you, so talk a little bit more about like your experience with couples therapy, because I know that you have opinions on that when you are with an abuser.
Yeah. It's not just my opinion. It's any domestic abuse specialist. I happen to be certified in my state, but it doesn't matter. But like any domestic abuse expert is going to say, do not go to couple therapy with your abuser. So this isn't just me saying this. This is like run-of-the-mill industry standard abuse care for victims. Do not go. But because the therapist can't identify abuse because they're not abuse experts, there is no abuse training required, especially in family systems therapy. Family systems therapy is based on like it takes two to tango theoretical framework, and it's against their licensure to pick sides. So there is there are very few, so I don't want to like throw all therapists under the bus, but it's not a system-wide understanding of how to identify abuse and what to do about it. That is not the training that therapists get, especially when they're family systems basis. So we were going to therapists who were trained in family systems, and that's 99% of any therapist you go to for pornography addiction or couple therapy is going to have that training. So they're not going to come at it from an abuse perspective. They're not looking for a perpetrator or a victim. They are looking for, they're like negotiating, like, okay, these are his needs and these are her needs, and this is how we meet in the middle, and that's how they're going to approach it. And that only serves the abuser. So couple therapy is always going to benefit an abuser and always harm a victim because he'll manipulate the therapist and he'll manipulate other things. So throughout all of his therapy, we only went to couple therapy the last year. The rest of the time, I was like, I'm not going to therapy. You're the one who is an addict and you're the one who's causing all these problems. And so I'd like pop in, every once in a while to his therapy. And the therapist would usually be like, well, and then this is what you need to work on, Anne. And I'd be like, no, I don't. Sorry, I'm not doing that. And so my husband was always just like, man, I'm working so hard and I'm this amazing addict in recovery and she just won't really do her part. I didn't know until I studied abuse a lot that I did the exact right thing. Like that's exactly what victims should do, except for also while simultaneously getting to safety. So I was doing, like, I was thinking about it correctly, but I wasn't actually getting myself to safety. I was still like fighting him all the time, right? I was still in the vicinity of his manipulation, in the vicinity of all the people that he was manipulating to try to keep me kind of like in check. I think there came a point where he realized that like it was not gonna work for him. Where like I was not exploitable anymore. Like I was not acting like I should. In fact, he told me like, and when he said this, I knew what he meant. He was like, you never act the way you should. And what he meant was when I get really mad, you're supposed to back down.
Right.
You never act the way you should. That's so interesting.
Yeah. Like I'm
he
supposed
wanted
to, like,
different reactions from
yell
you.
at you. And then you're supposed to be like, okay, you're right. I won't do that. And I would never do that. So he was like, his abuse wasn't working the way that he wanted it to. And he was very confused and he couldn't figure out how to like get me to do what I was quote unquote supposed to do. And even when he tried to like wrangle other people in, you know, therapists or clergy or whoever to tell me to do it, I was like, no, I'm not doing that. So then he did something quote unquote accidental, but it was on purpose. And he sprained my fingers as he was like, we were in a heated fight. And he grabbed my fingers and pushed them all the way back and pushed me into a cabinet.
Oh.
And he's not, I mean, I would never have thought of him as a physical abuser at the time. But I was like, oh, okay. So I got my kids, stuck them in the car, took them to my parents' house, went to the Instacare and put my hand, like they were like, why are you here? And I sat my hand on the desk and I said, domestic abuse. And that like freaked everybody out, you know, like everyone's like, oh, okay. So they called the cops came, arrested him, pulled him out of my house. And then he got a protective order from the court. I did not want to press charges at that time. Like at that time I was like, no, I just want this documented. Like, but I don't want to press charges. In my city, it's not left up to a woman. Like she can't not press charges. Well, I mean, she doesn't press the charges. They do. And you don't have any control over it. So the police were like, you don't have a choice. Like you have nothing to do with this. We are pressing charges. We're going to go get him. So he spent a night in jail and bailed himself out. And I don't know if he took an Uber home or maybe friend. Yeah. He called a friend to get home and he didn't come home because he couldn't because now he had a protective order. And then I just was like, okay, he'll figure this out because he's such a good guy. And then I started going to the domestic violence shelter, not to live there or anything, but to just like get services. Like, okay, he's got a trial coming up. Am I supposed to like testify? Am I not supposed to testify? What am I going to do? I didn't know what to do. I prayed just a lot. The only answer that I ever got was to be still. So I didn't really do anything. After about 9 months of this, not talking to him at all, and him not talking to me because he had a protective order and because he's going to follow the law because he's such a good guy, you know. He filed for divorce. Then we got divorced, and through the divorce process is when I started podcasting, actually.
How did you feel about him filing for divorce versus you?
It was a relief to me. Who I was back then, I was not ever going to file for divorce. I had decided, which is weird. It doesn't make sense to me because when I married him, I was like, if you do any of these things, I am getting a divorce. And I wasn't afraid of divorce. Like, that's just not my personality. So I don't know if I had been so manipulated and gaslit and maybe spiritual abuse and stuff that like the person that I was in that moment could just not like bring myself to do that. So I was relieved. Like when he messaged, I don't actually think he wanted to get divorced, to tell you the truth. I think that he was doing it because he thought that I'd be like, okay, never mind, we can talk. Because I just would not talk to him. Like I blocked him on my phone and was like, I'm out, you know? And so he couldn't manipulate me. He couldn't do anything. And I think he thought he could message me like via email. So I'd blocked him on my phone, but he could like write me an email. And he said, hey, you know, it's with a heavy heart that I've decided I'm going to file. I just wrote back and said, okay.
Yeah.
That's it. And then he kept missing deadlines. So it wasn't until like, I don't know, I'm making numbers up because I'm really bad with numbers. So nobody hold me to this, but it was like 4 or 6 months later that he actually filed. So I think he was expecting me to be like, oh no, we need to talk.
Right.
And I literally never talked to him again after that.
Wow.
Like, ever. I mean, that's not true. I literally only talked to him like maybe 4 times, and it was like for 2 minutes, just no, I wasn't going to have it. I was done. I'm like, I have had so many discussions with you. We've had so many fights. I know how this is going to go. Like, my closure is knowing that you are an emotional and psychological abuser. And I only knew that because I started studying abuse so much, and I realized that like this whole pornography addiction recovery complex, this industrial complex, they're looking right at abuse and they're refusing to call it abuse. And that's why I started podcasting, because I was like, there's like I went to therapy. Well, I made my husband go to therapy, and he went willingly for 7 years. And I'm facing this head on for 7 years. And no one tells me it's abuse.
Yeah.
How, what? Like, I have a master's degree. I'm not dumb, like, if this can happen to me, this is happening to everyone. Nobody knows it's abuse. And then people are like, well, why didn't she get out? It's because she didn't know. She did not know what was facing her. And then if it's escalating to physical abuse, which since I've experienced both, I think the emotional and the psychological is way, way worse than physical, because you've got a bruise, you're not crazy. When it's the emotional and psychological, you're just like, what is happening? I'm so confused. I can't figure it out.
Yeah, in your podcast, I think you call emotional and psychological abuse invisible abuse, right?
Yes, I've called it that before. Most of the time I just call it like emotional and psychological abuse, but yes, it is.
Yeah, I really like that, because it's so difficult to spot. It really is this invisible cycle, and especially when you're in it, like when you, the person, are being emotionally or psychologically abused, it can like appear invisible to you, but even to people around you. So I really like the way that you call it that. Would you be able to go into kind of the differences between emotional and psychological abuse, and how people can differentiate between the two?
My opinion, so this is Anne's definition of emotional and psychological abuse, would be emotional is when they manipulate your emotions, and psychological is when they manipulate your thoughts. So emotional abuse would be like they start crying, they want you to feel bad for them. They want you to pity them. They're trying to make you feel guilty. They're trying to, any type of emotional manipulation, or even like they take your emotions and weaponize them against you. So like, you're crying or you're mad, and they're like, well, you always get mad, like, like, what's your problem? You're just such an angry, bitter person, something like that. Psychological abuse is when they try to alter your reality, in that they are lying to you, and everything might feel fine. Right. So they might call and say, hey, I love you so much. You're so amazing. Thanks for everything you do. I'm so sorry. I'm just going to be home late tonight because I've got this thing at work. And you feel great. You're like, okay, sounds good. Love you too. See you later, and they get home at 9 and everything's fine. And they have psychologically abused you because the reality they have presented to you is not reality at all. So you are living in this like alternate reality that's fake, that they have purposely contrived, and they are purposefully keeping you there. So that's how I would differentiate emotional and psychological abuse. Psychological abuse, I think, is way harder to figure out, because you might not even have those weird, like, I'd say like internal, your gut doesn't necessarily go off. If everything's going really well and they call and say that they're going to be a little bit late, or that they're going to like, go play tennis with their friend or something, like that's not necessarily, your alarm bells might not go off. Like when they might go off with emotional abuse, when they're manipulating you with your emotions. I think emotional abuse feels bad. We can't always figure it out, especially when we feel guilty or we feel like, oh, I am a bad person or something. But psychological abuse is really, really scary, because there's been women I've talked to who they're like, I never had any idea. Like, my marriage was perfect. He was the best husband in the world. Everything was wonderful. He never got mad at me. And then I found out that he'd been lying to me for 20 years,
Yeah, terrifying.
That kind of stuff is super scary.
Yeah.
How often have you seen, just from your experience, I know you also talk about like narcissism and like narcissistic disorder, like the level or the abuser, are they often also a narcissist? Do you see that in your experience?
We don't diagnose anyone at BTR, so
Sure.
I don't know that. I think that, like, the classic, like, if you look at a narcissist checklist or something, that they would check a lot of those boxes. I think the thing that trips victims up is that very question. Are they a narcissist? Do they have a personality disorder? Do they have anger management issues? Do they have like childhood trauma that they haven't resolved? And victims are always looking for a reason, because they think because they want to be safe, right? I mean, victims only want safety. They don't want to control things. If they knew the truth, they'd be like, okay, fly on, my friend. Like, let your freak flag fly somewhere else, right? The problem is they don't know the truth. So they are just looking for safety. And so I think in our mind as victims, we're thinking, if we knew what the problem was, then we could solve it. And so I think that's where victims get tripped up. And that's also exactly where the abusers want us. They want us to be worried about the reason. They want us to be thinking, okay, well, if we got couple therapy, maybe that would help. Or if you read this book, or if we had this really, like, if we spent time together, if we had sex, if we did this or that.
Yeah, that's so true in my case. I think like
I was just thinking that, Rachel.
I was constantly trying to like get all the puzzle pieces and put them all together and get this book and listen to this podcast and this sermon and go to therapy and go to couples therapy. And, oh, he's acting this way because I did this, or I'm acting this way because he did this. Like, I was always trying to solve the mystery and be the Scooby-Doo gang, I don't know, and try to like figure it out. And that kept me in it for so long, because I always looked at it as like, well, this is a problem that I can solve and then everything will be fine. And it's like, no, this isn't a problem I can solve. This is just a person I should not be with. They are abusing me.
Yeah. Well, and they want you to feel like that. And I would say so do couple therapists. Their goal is resolution, right? Their goal is not emotional and psychological safety, which means separation from the harm and proximity to the harm. And clergy is like this too. So you go into clergy and you're like, hey, I'm worried my husband's using porn. And what's the clergy going to do? They're going to say, well, I'm going to get him in here and I'm going to have him repent, right? I'm going to like help him be a better person, rather than recognizing this is an adult man who already knows this. It's really weird, but he's already been told this somewhere before. And you telling him this, you pulling him into the office, clergy, I'm pretending like I'm clergy right now, me pulling him into this office and saying, hey, your wife just told me that you've been using porn and masturbating and that you haven't been having sex with her and you're very emotionally detached, and let me help you be a better person, is just like the perfect storm for manipulation. Instead of saying to that woman, wow, your husband is an adult man who has heard this before. You're in emotional and psychological danger. How can I help you? Like, clearly, until he's not doing this anymore, we need to help you be safe. What can we do to help you? And like, there's no point in calling an adult man in to an office to tell him something that he already knows. And I think like women think, well, he's such a good guy. Maybe he just doesn't, like, nobody's told him before. I'm like, I promise you, someone has told him that you shouldn't lie to your wife. This is not a new thing.
Right. Yeah.
And there are healthy men out there who have never lied to their wife beyond like, yeah, I like that dress, because they love her, like,
right.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. You were going to ask.
It's okay. No, I was going to say, betrayal trauma is like a specific kind of trauma. Are you able to speak a little bit to like the differences between that kind of trauma and what it does to the brain when like your partner betrays you?
So the difference between like betrayal trauma, which a lot of people define as CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So as opposed to PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, this is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't think it's a disorder. I don't think it's the right thing to say to women, to say like if I could go back in time and name Betrayal Trauma Recovery, the organization that I chose the name for, if I could call it something else, I would go back in time and say the normal reaction you are going to have when you've been lied to repeatedly over time and consistently and chronically by the person who is supposed to be your most trusted person in the entire world. When you talk about PTSD, that happens usually from a traumatic incident like war or an event like even a car accident or something like that. Usually it's that they have a traumatic triggers to sounds or experiences, but it's generally reduced or not. I don't want to say reduced, but confined to that period of time when they were a soldier, let's say, or the period of time when they were had that traumatic event occur. So betrayal trauma is more the experience over years, and it's also more likely to happen again. There's a lot of, I want to say, so-called betrayal trauma experts out there in the pornography addiction recovery space who they approach betrayal trauma as like, she's traumatized because she found out about his double life. And I think that is always the wrong approach because they're traumatized when they realize they've been psychologically and emotionally abused. Mm-hmm. Because if you're like, okay, it was just from the discovery of his porn use, and so we just need to get him to stop using porn and then everything will be fine. And then he's still acting the exact same way and lying to everybody and saying, I don't use porn anymore, so I don't know what her problem is. And then they'll say to her, oh, your trauma from finding out that he used to use porn is still triggered. Instead of saying, okay, you're still being triggered. Maybe he's still abusing you. Mm-hmm. Right. So the likelihood of the trauma reoccurring is very high. So women who share children with their abuser, divorce does not solve an abuse problem. So then they continue to be emotionally and psychologically abused after the divorce by co-parenting, messages and all kinds of stuff. So I was abused post-divorce for 8 years by my ex until I finally figured out the strategies to shut that down, but not through court. I mean, women are abused through court. They're abused through all of these other avenues for abuse. So, I think that's something different that we do at Betrayal Trauma Recovery than like a domestic violence shelter. Domestic violence shelter will be like, you just got to get divorced. Yeah. It's going to be the answer to all your problems. And I'm like, no. I mean, I'm not pro or anti-divorce here, but like safety. You got to think about safety, your emotional and psychological safety. And I am not about to tell you what the most safe thing is for you, but I guarantee you that divorce will not solve your abuse problem if you share children with him. And so you need to know safety strategies. You need to know tools. I teach those in the Living Free workshop and the Message workshop. And then whether you're married or divorced, you will be able to get to safety by using strategy. And it's not anything that like a therapist would tell you because it doesn't involve communication. Like it does not involve you going to them and saying, hey, you're hurting my feelings. This keeps happening. And, because all the therapists are like, well, have you communicated that to him? And you're like, well, 10 million times,
Right.
They're just going to lie to my face. So I'd say besides betrayal trauma recovery, I would not recommend that someone go to a so-called betrayal trauma specialist, because they're going to see the trauma as coming from the discovery rather than abuse.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine it was really hard post-divorce having to co-parent and kind of like navigate all of that. How has that been for you and your kids?
It's really hard. So they, like, in my ex's case, there was nothing that he could use to exploit me for anymore in terms of physical labor or anything like that. So I was of no use to him anymore whatsoever, right? Because I'm not propping up his image. I'm not doing anything. So really, the only way that they can get anything out of you after divorce is by exploiting your emotions, because they love it when you're distressed or upset. And then also they'll have some kind of goal that they want. A lot of times it might be to like stop paying child support, or to not have to pay alimony or something like that. So you're like, my ex undermined, I have a child with special needs. So he was undermining all of his medical care. He was undermining my kids' extracurricular activities, that kind of thing. So it was just constantly, it's like you're co-parenting. Well, you're not co-parenting. It's like you're trying to be a single parent with someone who is trying to make it harder for you.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than someone who is actually trying to parent. Like, they're on purpose trying to make it harder. There were times where I was like, okay, this is what needs to happen, this appointment and stuff, and he would cancel the appointment and he would make sure it didn't happen. And like, he came to a occupational therapy appointment for my son and was fine, like in front of me in the occupation. He was like totally normal, like acted like everything was fine. It was his parent time, so he put our child back in his car, and then I went to drive off, and I like something was in the trunk, so I had to stop and like get out and get it in the trunk, and I noticed him walking back in, but he didn't notice that I saw him do that, and so I walked back in, and he was explaining to the occupational therapist how my son was fine, and that I had just made all this stuff up, and he didn't need to come to occupational therapy anymore.
Oh, wow.
And I overheard him, and I walked over and I said, you can't make decisions like this by yourself. And also, if you needed to tell the occupational therapist this, you need to talk to the occupational therapist with me here, like, and he just was just like, shut it down. But usually he did that on his own, where I would have doctors or other people call me and say, okay, well, we can't treat him because your husband has taken away, like, he's canceled it. So it just makes, being a single parent is very hard, but being a single parent with someone who's trying to make everything harder is even harder than being a single parent. So it was
Absolutely
rough. So I determined, like, because I lost a court case. If you want to hear more about my story, I have a book coming out soon, and then you can listen to my podcast. But through all of this, I was like, you know what? I can't depend on the court because they make things worse. I can't depend on therapists. I can't depend on anyone. I need to depend just on God. It's just me and God. And I've got to figure out a way through God to deliver myself and my kids from this abuse. The strategies that I learned did deliver us. So he basically, after I used these strategies, signed my kids away without going to court. So he doesn't really have any parent time anymore and doesn't have anything to do with us anymore. But that was through strategy. I tried to beat him in court, and they gave him more parent time.
Oh, wow.
And it was only a year later that he signed the kids away. So this is after he's like, no, I'm going to win in court. He's like, oh, yeah, no problem. Yeah, you can have them. So for them, it's not about the kids. It's about control. It's about power. And the strategies that we teach at BTR are about how to, like, both not confront the abuse, but also not let them exploit you anymore. So you're in this like strange middle place where you're like, everything's fine. I don't know what the big deal is. And also I'm not going to have sex with you. And I'm also not going to talk to you because I'm busy. Not because he's an abuser. So that's where I always made the mistake, is that I would confront him all the time instead of being like, oh, you're fine. I just got a thing. Bye-bye. I was always trying to prove to him like who was right. And now, I think the other beautiful thing about the strategies that we teach at BTR is that, like at the beginning, I was like, oh, I don't want to do this. It doesn't make sense and it's hard. But after I did it for a while, I started to feel so much different. And so it also freed my mental space and because you both have probably experienced this. After you leave the relationship, even if you're not talking to them, they are still in your head for a really long time. And so clearing out that mental space too, where you're not living in fear, and you're not living in the trauma, and you're not living in that space anymore, and they can't hurt you. If it's so freeing.
Did you develop these strategies like as you were podcasting? Because you mentioned you started like right when he filed for divorce. Is that when you started the podcast?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, around that time. Yeah. And,
okay.
And I developed these strategies in real time while I was podcasting.
Got it. So do you have a community then who's like been with you from the beginning of the podcast, who I'm like curious about like the community from the beginning and how you've seen the podcast and the organization grow and kind of like the effect it's had.
Yeah. And why podcasting? What made you go that route?
When I was praying to know if I should either take the protective order off and talk to him, or if I should file for divorce, and I got the answer to be still for 9 months, I did get an answer. I remember telling my mom, I got an answer. And she was like, which one is it? Because there were those two options, right? Take the protective order off or file for divorce. And I said, it's neither. I'm supposed to start a podcast. And she was like, what? I was like, yeah, I'm supposed to start a podcast. So that was just an answer to prayer. I started podcasting in real time. There were a lot of podcasts in the beginning where I was just crying into a microphone, into the void. I've since removed a lot of the first episodes because at that time I was doing 12-step, which I now do not recommend for victims of abuse at all. So if listeners had been with me from the beginning, they would have, like, a lot of people have been like, you sound like a completely different person. Like from the beginning, the way that you were talking and the way that you talk now, it's like just like 100%, like totally like different person that you are now. So, because I've been podcasting for, I don't know, 8 years or something. Like
that's amazing.
7. But so they've been with me for a long time, and I've evolved over time, and some of the evolution people don't agree with. They like now back like when I very first started, for example, I was like in 12-step and talking about my 12-step journey and my own recovery from being a bad person and looking at my character defects and now I'm like, don't do that. Don't do that. But there are still some people who maybe eventually were like, oh, I disagree with Anne because I like 12-step, and we maybe departed in our evolution of how we were thinking about things. I think if people stay married to their abuser, and he's still abusive and they're still unsafe, it's really hard to like live in that space and not, I don't know, I think the cognitive dissonance there, you just have to survive, right? And so because they're still surviving in that space, the way that they think about it, I think, gets warped by the abuser a lot over time. And that always worries me. But I think that the women who have chosen to stay for whatever reason, they're the ones who probably didn't evolve the same way that I did, I would say.
I want to ask, sometimes it can be really hard to determine that you are in an unhealthy relationship because you are being manipulated and you just don't know or brainwashed and things like that. And sometimes, like in my case, I think my family could see the signs. And I just want to ask, what are some tools that like a friend or family member can use to help a loved one who is being abused to see that this is happening to them and that there is hope on the other side, and to help them get out? Like, what would you say to that?
It's really hard. It's really hard. The level of abuse, it depends on the level of abuse. It depends on where she's at and what she thinks is the most safe for her. There's a lot of women who they really legitimately think, and for good reason, that the safest thing to do is to just like put their head down and, live their life and not try to make very many waves. That's I think what we all need to remember is that all victims of abuse are resisting abuse in the way that they think is the safest for them at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So as a third party observer who might think, oh, like she's not doing this right, that we need to take a step back and be like, this is not our life. This is not our story. We don't know like what she's going through. We don't know what's going on. She is doing the best she can under the circumstances that she can. Approaching any victim of abuse as someone who is brave and strong, and she's absolutely doing the best that she can, I think is the most important thing. Victims have been so put down by their abuser. The last thing they need is somebody else telling them, I know better than you.
Yeah.
So approaching it from that lens is, I think, smart. I think calling it for what it is always helpful. So she might disagree with you. She might say, no, he's not abusive. He's a really good guy. And just saying, well, I read this book about abuse and it checked all the boxes, I'll bring it to you. If it doesn't apply to you, no big deal. Like giving her an out too. Like maybe it doesn't, at least if you read it, you'd know, something like that might help. Maybe not. I have been known to be like at a restaurant and overhear, women talking. They're like having a girls' night or something and describing things and walking over and saying, hi, you don't know who I am, but what you're describing is abuse. Your husband is abusive. Have a good night.
Mm-hmm.
And just walking
And it plants that seed in their head though, too. Be like, oh, maybe that's what they needed to hear.
Yeah. Well, because if someone comes to you and they're like, oh my, I'm going through this and it's so hard. Like, it's not okay in our society to be like, your husband's an abuser.
Right.
It's okay to say, oh, maybe he's stressed or everything will get worked out, or, because nobody wants to like wreck someone else's marriage. That's not what we're going for. But I think if people understood, these are just industry standard, like when people come to my podcast and they're like, this crazy lady who's like saying this stuff, I'm like, it's just literally industry standard abuse stuff. Like I literally did not make any of this up. This is just like domestic abuse information. And but abusers would like us to think like, oh, it's extreme, or they're making this up, or this isn't true. Or I guess I get like, Anne's a man hater, or Anne like makes everything abuse. And I'm like, no, I don't. Like if you came home and unloaded the dishwasher and you were really nice and you never lied to your wife and you never had an affair and then you mowed the lawn, I would not say that's abuse. So like everything is not abuse. But they like to say that because they want people to think it's okay. It's okay. Lying's not abuse, or this isn't abuse. So
they want to minimize it. Yeah.
Yeah. Getting educated is the most helpful thing. And then meeting victims where they are and just being there, validating them, letting them know they're brave and they're strong, and not blaming them for any part of it. Not even saying, hey, well, if you would get out, maybe he would stop doing this to you. Instead, just saying, you're brave, you're strong. I know you'll figure this out.
I love that.
If for somebody who has experienced a betrayal trauma, what are your tips for recovery? Like if you could name a few as like a jumping off point for somebody.
I think the first thing is know what you're recovering from. So you're recovering from abuse, right? So if they're like, I have betrayal trauma, a lot of women will look it up or people will say that. But the treatment is not for abuse. So I think the first thing is to identify what you're recovering from exactly, the truth of the situation. In my opinion, it's easier to recover when you know the truth. When you're confused and you think, like in your case, Rachel, you shared your story on my podcast, which was like harrowing, and I appreciate it. And at the point where you recognized, oh, like he's been lying to me the whole time. Like he doesn't care about me. Like the recovery is much, it's like, that's like, ugh, right? It's like a stab to your heart. And you're thinking like, did he ever love me? Did he ever actually care? The answer is no. He wanted to exploit us. He's not capable. The abuser, sorry, I'm not talking about yours specifically, but just like the abuser in general is not capable of actually caring for someone. They're transactional. So they care about what they can get. So when they look at you and they have the most loving look in their eyes, like knowing the thing they're loving is what they're getting from you. It's not you. And so like the truth of this person is incapable of genuine care for someone, I think it makes it a lot easier to recover than thinking like, but he loved me. And is this what love is? And could I have done something? That makes it really hard to recover when you're trying to figure out like what happened. And I think also just having a community, like the community at Betrayal Trauma Recovery, I love it because no woman comes where they have to like explain it. Like they come and we're like, we get it immediately. There's no like trying to like explain to someone what happened. We know what happened. We understand it. The patterns are similar. You can tell your individual story and you're just going to get validation. You're not going to get blame. You're not going to get, somebody questioning like, what did you do? Or what part did you play? And so having a community that really gets it and understands is also really key, because anything else is just going to kind of be the extension of his abuse, right? The things he was putting on you and the blame that he was trying to get you to take responsibility for the problems. That's just like, he's like haunting you after, right?
Yeah. Speaking of community, on our podcast, we talk about how it's so important to have a safe person that you can talk to and be honest with, and how, if I had maybe told somebody and confided in somebody about my ex's lying and, affairs that I was finding out about, if I had been able to just tell somebody, maybe I would have gotten out sooner. And so, and we aptly, well, not aptly, but as kind of an inside joke, we call that person our Thelonious. It's a name from the Shrek movie. It's kind of a long story, but that's kind of mine and Megan's inside joke. That's become an inside joke with people on the podcast. So, we wanted to know, Anne, if you have a Thelonious, if you have a safe person that you feel like you can go to and tell anything to.
One of the reasons I started Betrayal Trauma Recovery was to create that for people who did not have that in their real life, so they could come to us. And like our groups run multiple times a day, so you don't have to wait for an appointment, or you can literally talk to somebody who gets it immediately, and like, well, not immediately, but that day, any day of the week. I was lucky enough in my personal situation to have friends that I knew who supported me 100%. And I think that's what enabled me to build BTR, was because I thought like, because I had that support system myself. But also why I created it, because so many women are so isolated. Like, I interviewed somebody on my podcast today who her abusive spouse through the divorce convinced literally every single one of her friends that she was a terrible person and completely isolated her from her friends and family. So she had literally 0 people in real life.
Man.
And so she came to BTR. That gave her the strength. We were there. We were a safe space. And then she was able to, as she got stronger, to make new friends, right? And because the goal isn't like, oh, we're a cult.
Right.
Come and we'll be your friends forever. No, like we're like the emergency room. We're your emergency friends. And when you get to a safe, stable place with real life people that you can form those like healthy relationships with, we're happy that you're like moving on, because that's the goal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's so awesome. Yeah, everybody needs somebody. And yeah, sometimes you can be so isolated, especially if you're being abused. So it's good whether it's, a family member or a friend or like a group that you've created like BTR. And I think that's so great to give people a resource like that. If you could say anything to any woman who might be struggling in an abusive relationship right now, who's listening to this episode, what message would you like to send?
I go back and forth, right? About like, what's the most important thing to say? But lately I've been landing on, it doesn't matter if it's abuse. What matters is you. You matter. And you are brave and you are strong and you are worth like treating well. You are worth having dreams and hopes, and you are worth having aspirations, and sacrificing your awesomeness and your strength and your beauty and your goals for someone else who is exploiting you is not for you. It's for them. And your life is for you. And I think so many of us with like our faith upbringing and other things, we've been thinking like, I'm not like a whole person or that I need to, I don't know what, in order to be worthy or in order to have a good life. And a healthy relationship will have enough space for you to live your best life. And so I guess the thing I would say today, it depends on the day, but is rather than worrying about him and whether or not it's abuse or not, focus on the kind of life that you want and the kind of relationship that you want. And rather than trying to get him to do that, like go live it now. And focus on that, and that will get you to where you need to go.
I love that. That's not the answer you'd expect, but I think that is really going to resonate with some of our listeners.
Yeah, I agree. Taking the focus off that other person and putting it on you and figuring out what you want, I think
what do you want with your life?
Yeah, dream a little bit. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that wasn't the answer I expected you to say either, but I love that you surprised us. Well, Anne, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and sharing just amazing nuggets of wisdom and insight. And I know Megan and I both learned a lot too from this interview, and I know our listeners will take a lot of value from it. So thank you so much. And I want to plug your podcast. Make sure to go check out the BTR podcast and BTR.org if you need a resource for any sort of abuse or betrayal trauma recovery.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you